Hi everyone, welcome back to Java Full Stack Flow. Today's Spring Boot interview question is, how does transactional work internally in Spring Boot? Now let's understand what actually happens internally when we add transactional annotation. We will go step by step. So let's start. What happens internally? First, transactional is implemented using Spring AOP Proxy based transaction management and Platform Transaction Manager. When we call a method annotated with transactional, Spring doesn't execute method directly. Spring adds transaction management around that method. Now let's understand the complete flow. Example, service method. Here we have an service class, account service. Inside this service class, we have our transfer money method, and we have added transactional annotation above the method. Inside transfer money method, we have two operations, debit account and credit account. So first we debit the amount from one account, then we credit that amount to another account. Now let's see what happens internally when somebody calls this method. Internal flow step by step. Step 1 is method call. A controller or another Spring Bean calls this transfer money method. For example, controller to transfer money method. But remember, the call doesn't immediately execute our actual method. Next, step number 2 is Spring AOP Proxy. Spring creates a proxy around the target bean. Depending on the situation, Spring can use a JDK dynamic proxy or a CGLB based proxy. You can think of this proxy as a middle layer between the caller and our actual service object. So instead of controller to actual service, the flow becomes first controller, next proxy, and then actual service. Step number 3 is TransactionInterceptor. The proxy intercepts the method call and invokes the TransactionInterceptor. What does the TransactionInterceptor do? It handles the transaction related logic around our method execution. So it basically says, before executing the method, let's handle the transaction, and after the method finishes, let's decide whether to commit or roll back. Next, step number 4 is Transaction Manager. The Transaction Interceptor delegates the transaction management to Platform Transaction Manager. This is the component responsible for managing the actual transaction lifecycle. It can start the transaction, commit it, or roll it back. Next, step number 5 is Begin Transaction. The Transaction Manager starts a database transaction. You can think of it as begin transaction. At this point, the database operations performed as part of this transaction are being managed together. Next, step number 6 is method execution. Now our actual transfer money method executes. First is debit account and the credit account. Both database operations are part of this transaction. This is very important. We are not treating debit and credit as two complete independent operations. They are participating in the same transaction. Next, now we reach step number 7, commit or rollback. There are two possibilities. If the method completes successfully, Spring commits the transaction. That means the database changes are permanently saved. But if a rollback triggering exception occurs, Spring rolls back the transaction. That means the changes made within the transaction are undone according to the transaction and database behavior. Next, let's look at the complete flow. So the complete execution flow shown on the left side is, first controller calls transfer money method, then Spring AOP Proxy, then Transaction Interceptor, then Platform Transaction Manager, then Begin Transaction. The execute transfer money inside the method debit account and credit account. Now method can have two outcomes. If method completes successfully, the transaction is committed. If exception thrown, the transaction is rolled back according to the applicable rollback rules. So this entire flow is the heart of how transactional works internally. Now let's look at one of the most important interview points. Spring uses proxy based AOP. Spring's other transactional works through the proxy based AOP. Next point is external method call. For example, if another Spring Bean calls our transactional method, the call can go through the proxy. Next, now let's look at the important problem, self-invocation. Suppose here we have service class, order service with two methods, outer method and inner method. Here, if outer method directly calls inner method, this.inner method, this is called self-invocation. The important point is this call happens inside the same object. It doesn't go through Spring Proxy. So the proxy is bypassed and other transactional may not be applied. So how can make it through proxy? Instead of calling the method directly using this.inner method, we can call it through another Spring managed bean or another proxied service. Example, private order service annotated with @autovide and then call order service.inner method. Now the call can go through the Spring Proxy. So the transaction interceptor gets a chance to apply the transaction behavior. Next is interview answer. Now if the interviewer directly asks how does transactional work internally, you can answer like this. transactional works internally using Spring AOP and proxy based transaction management. When a transaction method is called through the proxy, TransactionInterceptor intercepts the call and uses PlatformTransactionManager to start a transaction. Then the actual method executes. If the method completes successfully, the transaction is committed. If a rollback triggering exception occurs, the transaction is rollback. One important point is that self-invocation can bypass the proxy, so other transactional may not be applied. That's all about other transactional internal flow. If you found this video is helpful, please subscribe my YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram for more Spring Boot interview questions. Thank you.